Chapter 11. Miss Brotherton pushes her inquiries further. A well-arranged scheme disagreeably defeated. A visit and its consequences. Mary Brotherton certainly did not return home that night with any doubts on her mind respecting the nature of Sir Matthew Dowling's benevolence. But the fever of spirits which had seized her was greatly increased by the information she had gained. There was a vast deal of energy and strength of purpose in the mind of Mary Brotherton, but hitherto all this had lain latent and inert. The sentiment, which in 99 cases out of 100 is the first to awaken the female heart to strong emotion, seemed to be totally powerless to her. She had never yet felt the slightest approach to the passion of love, nor was it very likely she should, for one among her many peculiarities of character was the persuasion that every man who paid her attention was in pursuit of her fortune, an idea which to such a temper as hers was calculated to act as sevenfold shield against all amatory attacks upon her heart. Most truly, therefore, up to this time, she had continued, in maiden meditation, fancy-free. But this could be said no longer. Neither fancy nor any other faculties could be termed free in one whose thoughts fixed themselves by night and day upon one single subject, while feeling that to it she was ready to sacrifice everything else in life. On re-entering her house on the memorable night of the Dowling Lodge theatrics, Miss Brotherton retired to her apartment without even the intention of sleeping. She laid her head upon her pillow, deliberately determined not to close her eyes in sleep till she had made up her mind as to the best way of rescuing the pale, trembling child, whose voice and form haunted her from the horrible bondage of Sir Matthew Dowling's charity. The question was not altogether an easy one. She could hardly doubt that a very strong indignation would follow any effort on her part to interfere with a child publicly held up as the favoured object of Sir Matthew Dowling's loudly vaunted benevolence, and, moreover, privately marked out by his vindictive nature as a victim to his hatred. Whether as a rival in his munificence or a champion against his hate, it was pretty certain that her interference would render her obnoxious to her pompous neighbour's displeasure, and this she had no inclination to encounter if she could help it. For though at this moment she felt within her a strength and firmness of purpose not easily shaken, the poor girl knew that she stood alone in the world, with no friend to support her more powerful than Nurse Tremlett, and nothing but her £200,000 worth of this world's trumpery to enable her to have her way and her will in many matters that she feared might turn out rather difficult to manage. So she determined to avoid quarrelling with Sir Matthew Dowling as long as she could, and though the image of Mchl struggling with his tears and the plaintive sound of his voice as he pleaded for leave to labour again absolutely haunted her memory, she determined upon being cautious, wise, and very deliberate in any measures she might eventually take to ensure his release. Under the influence of these prudent resolutions, Miss Brotherton, for the present, abandoned her purpose of seeking a conversation with the child himself, and determined to find her way to the cottage of his mother instead. Yet even this she felt must be done with caution. Her carriage and her liveries were about as splendid and as conspicuous as carriage and liveries could be, and though she knew not precisely in what direction the widow Armstrong might be found, it was easy enough to guess that she did make use of her ordinary mode of conveyance in reaching her abode. Let it be where it might, she would attract more attention than she desired. It was to Mrs. Tremulett that she determined to apply in this dilemma, and at their tete-a-tete breakfast on the following morning, she once more led the conversation to the factories. "You must not scold me, dear friend," said she, "if you find that I have, as I told you I would, disobeyed your advice altogether about thinking no more of the factory people, for I cannot get them out of my head, Nurse Tremlett." "I am sorry for it, my dear," replied the good woman gravely, "because I am quite sure that you will only vex yourself and do no good." "You ought to know me better by this time, Miss Tremlett, than to fancy that your manner of speaking on this dark subject is the way to check my curiosity. It is pretty effectually awakened, perhaps, before, but it had been otherwise, what you said would be quite enough to set me upon inquiring into it. Nurse Tremulett, I will know everything that the most preserving inquiry can teach me, respecting the people to whose labour all the rich people in this neighbourhood owe their wealth, and myself among the rest. And when I tell you that at the present moment this is the only subject upon which I feel any real interest, I think you are too wise to attempt turning me from it by saying, "My dear, you will only vex yourself." I do indeed, my child, know you too well to fancy that if you have set your mind upon it, you will give it up. So I have nothing more to say, Miss Mary. Well then, my dear woman, replied Mary, taking her hand, if, through all the years we have passed together, I have shown such a determined spirit for no reason in the world, but only to get my own wanton silly will, do me the justice to anticipate that I shall not be less obstinate in this one thing, and believe to be right, than in all the many wherein I was most likely suspected myself to be wrong. I do believe, Nurse Tremlett, that it is my duty to understand this matter better than I do, and if this be so, I will trust to God to make up to me for all the vexation your prophecy threatens it will bring. If that is the way you think of it, my dear, heaven forbid that I should seek to hinder you. But rich as you are, dear Mary, if you was to give it all, and 10,000 times as much besides, what good could it do? The mills will go on just as the same, you know. I don't want to stop the mills, Nurse Tremlett. Why should I? Industry, ingenuity, science, enterprise must of course be all brought into action by this flourishing cotton trade, and beyond all doubt it would be equally wicked and wild to wish its destruction. That is not the notion I have got hold of, good nurse, very, very far from it. I assure you, what I want to find out is whether, by the nature of things, it is impossible to manufacture worsted and cotton wool into articles useful to man, without rendering those employed upon it unfit to associate with the rest of their fellow creatures. This seems to me so grossly an absurdity that I cannot give faith to it, and therefore I suspect that the depravity and wickedness you and Miss Martha Dowling talk about must arise from these people having too much money at their command. This, perhaps, may lead to intemperance and extravagance. Don't you think this may be the case, Miss Tremlett? Good gracious, no, Miss Mary. Why, they are all the very poorest starving wretches upon the earth. But they may be poor because they are extravagant, nurse. They must get a most monstrous quantity of money, for though none of the gentlemen ever talk much of their factories, I have repeatedly heard allusions made to the enormous sums paid every week to the workpeople. And it is quite clear that all the families must get a great deal, because all the little children work, which can hardly be the case elsewhere. Now, I cannot help thinking, nurse, that a great deal of good might be done by teaching them a little economy, and inducing them to lay by their superfluous money in savings banks. That is one great reason why I want to get acquainted with the people themselves. For now, for instance, that poor sick widow Armstrong, the mother of the little boy that Sir Matthew Dowling has taken, I am quite sure that she can have no wickedness to hurt me, and I am determined, nurse, to go and call upon her. Well, my dear, that can't do no great harm, certainly, and if you like it, I can go in the carriage with you. Most certainly I would like you to go with me, but not in the carriage, Miss Tremlett. I don't want to have all the people in her neighborhood staring at me, at her either, and that they would be sure to do if we went in the carriage. I mean to walk, nurse. Do you know where the woman lives, my dear? No, I must leave you to find that out. What is her name, Miss Mary? Armstrong. She is a widow and lives somewhere in Ashley. Let us walk into the garden, and while I am looking after my seedlings, you can inquire of one of the under gardeners, or the boy, and if you manage the matter well, the next prime blossom that I can get from my experiment beds shall be called the tremulate geranium. While this conversation was going on at Milford Park, the residence of Miss Brotherton, Dr. Crockley arrived to enjoy a tete-a-tete breakfast with Sir Matthew in the study at Dowling Lodge. This room, though not so splendid as some of its neighbours under the same roof, could, nevertheless, be made very snug and comfortable upon occasion, and an excellent breakfast was spread before them, while the two gentlemen sat in judgment upon little Michel's contumacy, and consulted on the best method of bringing him into better order. Confound the imp! Exclaimed Sir Matthew as he selected his favourite dainties. Is it not provoking, Crockley, that I should have taken up such an aversion to him? Upon my soul, I never hated anything so much in my life. In the first place, it is disgusting to see him dressed up, walking about the house like a tame monkey, when I know that his long fingers might be pierced thousands of threads for 2 shillings a week. and that neither more nor less of that loathsome to see him eat at luncheon, sometimes when we have had him in before company, exactly the very same things that my children eat themselves, and then, upon the back of it all, to know that that ungrateful little viper hates the very sight of me. I don't believe, Crockley, that any good can come of this, equal to what makes me suffer in the doing. It is perfectly unnatural to see him close within an inch of my own legs. I'd rather have a tame toad crawling about by half. I must give it up, Crockley. I must, upon my soul. You are the master, Sir Matthew. I can't stop you. If you will, if do it, you will. But I can tell you this: I have been calling at 50 different houses at the very least since this job began, and I pledge you my sacred honor that in every one of them the only thing talked about was your benevolence and generosity. Such an example, cried one. So heavenly minded, said another. It is enough to bring a blessing upon the whole country, whined a third. And it is hoped that such goodness will be rewarded in this world and the next, observed a fourth. Think, Sir Matthew, how all this will tell against the grumblings about Miss Nancy Stephens and her sudden demise. That's true, devilishly true, Crockley, and yet there's no cure for me being sick at the stomach of every time I see him. I don't know about that. I should think it was, or at any rate, if you'd only bear it a little longer, I should not be at all surprised if you were to be relieved by some other great capitalist setting up in the same way, and as your name had been sung out, that would do just as well. Upon my soul, I'm in earnest. I should not the least wonder if, before the end of 3 months, every one of your first rates were to have a tame factory child in their houses to act like hedgehogs. We get to eat black beetles for us. And they'll do their work well, too, Sir Matthew. All the nasty, creeping, multiplying plagues, in the shape of evil tales against the factory system, would be swallowed up by the clearing off effects of these nice little hedgehog gentry. You're as keen as your own lancet, Crockley, and I never turn a deaf ear to anything you say. But it's monstrous hard, though, that I can't walk about my own house without running the risk of seeing this odious little grub. By the way, Crockley, why would not my lady take a factory girl in by way of charity? Some of the little wenches are sightly enough before they have worked down their flesh too far, and though I can't say I'm particularly tender over the lanky idiot looking slatterns that we mostly get at the mill, I bet what you please that I should never hate the sight of a girl as I do the sight of this boy. Very likely not, Sir Matthew, replied the doctor, laughing immoderately. But what would my lady say? And what would all the other ladies say? No, leave that alone, and make up your mind to let the boy have the run of the house for a month or two, after which you may send him to the devil if you will, for the good will be done, and the boy himself forgotten. That's all vastly easy for you to lay down, chapter and verse, wise man that you are, replied the knight. But if I tell you all, I can let you into a secret, Crockley, that would make you change your mind, perhaps. The long and the short of it is, I can't keep my hands off him. And if the young black-hearted scamp, I know he is black-hearted, I'm quite sure of it on the account of a look he has got in his eyes, that makes one always feel so uncomfortable, if he were to take it into his vile, ungrateful head to go about the country telling everything that I may have happened to say and do to him, when his nasty ways have pushed me further than I could bear, I don't think the history of the charity job would do much good, Doctor. Dr. Crockley gave a low whistle, and then, after a minute's meditation, said, That's a bore. I know it is, sharply responded his patron. A devilish bore. But you don't suppose that I am to stand bursting with rage and not take the liberty of speaking my mind to a factory grub, do you? Heaven forbid! A whole factory full of wenches may all drop down dead, I hope, before it comes to that, replied his friend. But what you have stated is worth attention, Sir Matthew. I don't like the notion that a child having tales to tell. It spoils all. I know it, returned the vexed knight. Martha told me just now, not 10 minutes before you came, that Miss Brotherton said she should like very much to talk to the boy. She is as sharp as a needle, you know, and I'll answer for it, who would find out all he's got to tell, and a devilish deal more, perhaps, in no time. Pretty work that would make, would it not? Augustus is sure of her, he tells me. Just fancy such a match as that spoiled by the 4 tons of that little viper. The very notion makes one mad. A cure must be found for that mischief, let it cost what it may, replied Crockley, and for the future it might be better, perhaps, for your charity, Sir Matthew, to show itself in some other way. You are too honest-hearted, that's the fact. A fine, bold intellect like yours can't descend to the paltry patience belonging to inferior minds. Is there no getting rid of the boy? No possibility of sending him prentice somewhere or the other? Prentice, said Sir Matthew, looking with a very singular expression into the face of his friend. Prentice, he repeated, and stretching out his hand, he seized upon that of Dr. Crockley, which he shook with extraordinary ardor. Send him as apprentice, upon my soul, Crockley. If you had laid down £500 upon this table, I should not have considered it as one of the half as much as worth as the word prentice. Yes, by Jove, he shall be apprentice. Oaf that I was for not thinking of it before. You don't know half the good you have done me by that word. 'Tis but lately, dear fellow, that you and I have come to understand one another thoroughly, and I have never yet talked to you about one or two points particularly interesting to all our capitalists. I never mentioned to you, did I? The Deep Valley Mills, not far from Appledom Cross, in Derbyshire? Never, Sir Matthew, as far as I can recollect, was the reply. Well, then, I will tell you something about them now that make you perceive plainly enough what a capital good hit you have made in talking of an apprenticeship for my young darling. Deep Valley Mill, Crockley, is the property of my excellent friend Elgood Sharpton. He is one of the men born to be the making of this country, a fine, manly, dauntless character, who would scorn to give up his notions before any act of Parliament that ever was made. His idea is, Crockley, and I should like to see the man who would venture to tell me it is not a glorious one, his idea is that we should get rid of our cursed corn laws. The whole British Dominion would soon be turned into one noble collection of workshops. I wish you could hear him talk. Upon my soul, it's the finest thing I know. He says that if the system is carried out into full action, as I trust it will be one of these days, all the grass left in England will be the parks and paddocks of the capitalists. Sharpton will prove to you as clearly as that 2 and 2 make 4 that the best thing for the country would be to scour it from end to end of those confounded idle drones, the landed gentry. They must go sooner or later, he says, if the corn laws are done away with. Then down goes the price of bread, and down goes the operatives' wages. And what will stop us then, doctor? Don't you see? It's as plain as the nose on your face that when the agricultural interest is fairly drummed out of the field, the day's our own. Who shall we have then spying after us to find out how many hours a day we choose to make our hands work? Do you see, Crockley? If we choose to work the vitals out of them, who shall say we shan't? I never heard a finer, clear line of argument in my life, Sir Matthew, replied the attentive listener. That man, Elgood Sharpton, seems born for a legislator, but I question not when you can get together and you act like flint and steel upon one another. Is that not the case? Pretty much, I believe, replied Sir Matthew, and I promise you, Crockley, I give no bad proof of my confidence in your honour and friendship by letting you into a few of our notions, for matters are by no means quite ripe for us to speak out as yet. Our policy is, you must know, to give out that it is the operatives who are clamouring for the repeal of the corn laws, whereas many among them, saucy rogues, are as deep as their betters, and know perfectly well, and be hanged to 'em, that the only reason for trying to make down with the corn laws the popular cry is that we may whisper in their ears, down with the wages, afterwards. Aye, doctor, if we can but manage this, England will become the great paradise of manufacturers, the great workshop of the world. When strangers climb our chalk cliffs to get a peep at us, they shall see, land at what point they will, the glowing fires that keep our engines going, illuminating the land from one extremity of the island to the other. Then think how we shall suck in. That is what we capitalists, my man, think how we shall suck in gold, gold, gold from all sides. The idea is perfectly magnificent. The fat Flemings must give up all hopes of ever getting their finical flax de vie with our cotton again, Crockley. But here Sir Matthew paused for a moment, as if half doubtful whether he should go on. The confidential impulse within him, however, worked so strongly in favour of the friendly, smiling physician that all reserve gave way, and winking his eye at him with a truly comical expression, he proceeded, Crockley, you don't understand how spinning in Flanders, they don't know yet how many baby sinews must be dragged and drawn out to mix, as it were, with the thread, before the work can be made to answer. No, we have fairly given Master Fleming the go-by in his own trade, for the future I must be pleased to go on hand-digging and sowing every inch of his dug muxen. till it teems with corn for exportation. That's what he's fit for, whereas science has put us rather in advance of all that, my good doctor. Our friends in Poland, too, shall plow away to the same tune, and Russia, from end to end, will become one huge granary at our service. Where will your aristocratic landholders be then, Crockley? Perhaps you can't tell, but I suspect I can. They'll just be in the factories, sir. Your manor and your preserves, we can get game enough from abroad. Your manors and your preserves will be covered with factories, except just here and there, where we capitalists may have taken fancy to my Lord Thistling's grounds or Duke to the Othering's mansion for our own residence. And this, I maintain, is just as it should be, and the reason why is plain. We have got before all the world in machinery, and so all the world must be content to walk behind us. By Jove, if I had my way, Crockley, I'd turn France and the Rhine into a wine cellar, Russia into a corn bin, and America, glorious America, north, south, east, and west, into a cotton plantation. Then should we not flourish? Then should we not bring down the rascals to work at our own prices, and be thankful too? What's to stop us? Trust me, there's not a finer humbug going than just making the country believe that the operatives are ramping for the appeal of the Corn Laws. It is a treat to hear you, Sir Matthew. I should be at a loss to name any man that I thought your equal in the gift of eloquence. But nevertheless, we must not forget business. We must not forget Master Mchl Armstrong, Sir Matthew. No, my friend, we will not forget him. Be patient for a moment, and I will make you understand how my friend Elgood Sharpton and my darling protege have been mixed up in my mind together. Sharpton's factory at Deep Valley is one of the most perfect institutions, I take it, that the ingenuity of man has ever produced. It is perfect, sir, just perfect. In this first place, it is built in the wild, desolate spot where the chances are about 10,000 to 1 against any of the traveling torments who take it upon themselves to meddle and make about what does not concern them. It is 100,000 to 1 against their ever catching sight of it. You never saw such a place in your life, Crockley. 'Tis such a hole that I don't believe the sunshine was ever known to get to the bottom of it. It was made on purpose, you may depend upon it. Well, Sir Sharpton, who, whatever he undertakes, is sure to get over the ground faster than any other man, for he never lets anything stop him. Sharpton felt quite convinced, you see, that the only way to carry on the work to any good purpose was to undersell. How was this to be done without the loss instead of gain? That's a question, I promise you, that has puzzled many a man that was no fool. But egad, it did not puzzle him. He knew well enough that it was not the material that came cheap enough, nor yet the machinery, though heaven knows that's dear enough. But 'tis the labor, sir, the damnation wages going on and on for evermore that drains the money away. And what then does he do but hit at once upon the very perfectest scheme that ever entered a man's head to lessen that ruinous burden? He knew well enough, for he has a most unaccountable deal of general information, that there were lots of parishes in England that didn't know where on earth to do with their pauper brats. There's many, that say this one thing, this nasty, filthy excess of pauper population, is the very mischief that is eating up the country and destroying our prosperity. But who's the greatest political economist, Crockley? The man who talks of the evil, or he who sets about finding a remedy? The political economists of the 19th century ought to erect a statue to Elgood Sharpton, and so they will, I have no doubt, when the subject comes to be more perfectly understood. For just mark what he has done. First, he finds out this capital spot for the job and builds a factory there. Next, he either goes himself or sends agents, good, capable, understanding men, to all the parishes that he finds are overburdened with poor. Then, sir, he enters philosophically into the subject with the parish authorities, but of course the proper discretion, and proves to them that no way could they do their duty by the parish children, particularly the orphans, or those whose parents don't trouble them so well as to by apprenticing them to a good trade. Here Sir Matthew paused, and a merry glance was exchanged between him and his companion. Well, Crockley, it is a good trade, a devilishly good trade, isn't it? At any rate, I promise you that so many parish felt convinced of it that Elgood Sharpton had soon got Deep Valley factory as full of young hands as it could cram. Now it is since that, you must know, that old Sir Robert took it into his head that little children must not be overworked. He he it was, I believe, that first set up that nonsensical cry to any purpose. And to be sure, nothing ever was so absurd in a country where everybody knows that if the young pauper spawn could but be made to die off, everything would go on well. It is not strange now that old Peel could not be contented to grow rich and hold his tongue, but no, he got bit by some poisonous humanity notion or other, and a devilish shake he gave to the system just at first by his absurd bill for the protection of infant paupers. But such men as Sharpton are not to be knocked down like ninepins, either by lawmakers or law. And to say the truth, old Sir Robert Peel's bill was to all intents and purposes a dead letter within 2 years after it was passed. Bless your soul. It was the easiest thing in the world to keep the creatures so ignorant about the bill after the first talk was over that they might have been made to believe anything and to submit to anything. In fact, the question for them always lies in an eggshell. They must either do what the masters would have of them or starve. That fact is worth all the bills that ever were passed. And another thing is that as long as there's nothing to prevent our friends and relations from being among the magistrates, even if the complaints are made, we can manage them. How true it is, Sir Matthew, that there is no inequality of accidental condition that can equal the unequal production by a decided superiority in intellectual powers, said Dr. Crockley. At this moment, I give you my sacred honor that I look upon you and your friend, Mr. Elgood Sharpton also, as standing in much more commanding position than any duke in the country. What a long descent compared to a long head. What's a long descent compared to a long head, Sir Matthew? I tell you what the difference is. A long descent pretty generally helps a man to empty his purse, whereas a long head will never fail to help him fill it. It is as clear to me as the sun's in heaven, Sir Matthew, that the game is in your own hands. I know, for I have made some curious experiments that way, and know what a dog may taught to do by hunger, and you may rely upon it that it is just as powerful in a man. Egad, Sir Matthew, it is a very fine subject for scientific experiments. It is difficult to say how far it might go. If a dog, for example, may be taught tricks by hunger that approaching in ingenuity to the powers of man, why may not a man, skillfully acted upon by the same principle, be brought to rival the docility of a dog?